Hello, everyone, and welcome to this IBM CodesF, which is part 3 in a series of blockchain-themed events that'll be held in July and August. The last event in the series is actually happening next week on Tuesday, August 7th, so please do register for that while you have time. For those of you who are new to IBM CodesF, we're a team of developer advocates from IBM in the Bay Area, and we host in-person and online meetups, lunch and learns, workshops, and exciting events. So you can meet very, very cool subject matter experts like Lennart here and learn about cutting-edge open source technologies with us. Today we have Lennart Frantzell for his 3rd session with us, an IBM Code developer advocate who's going to be presenting on building an end-to-end blockchain application. So please take it away, Lennart.
Thank you, Maya. So again, as Maya said, this week we'll talk about blockchain and building an edge-to-edge and end-to-end application. And let's start first of all with call for code, which I'm spending a lot of time on these days. This is a call by IBM, the Linux Foundation, the UN Human Rights Council, and the American Red Cross for programmers to create disaster preparedness applications that can be used for instance, the forest fires that are now sweeping California, and especially my native Sweden, where we have had massive forest fires in the last few months, where programmers can make a difference. So look out for call for code, click on that link later, and you see what you can do to help. And it's a great chance to do something really worthwhile and to win prizes and learn more about open source. And having said that, we want to do a slight recapitulation here about what we talked about earlier, and to point out that if you are on this call now, and if you haven't read Satoshi Nakamoto's paper, Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, do so this week. It's only 9 pages long, and it is really important. It's the foundation for Bitcoin and blockchain and everything to do with the new technology. And it's on bitcoin.org, bitcoin.pdf. Another paper we haven't mentioned so far is the Hyperledger Fabric, a distributed operating system for permissioned blockchains. And I have the link here as well. This is a 15-page paper, very, very important if you want to understand the architecture underpinnings of Hyperledger Fabric and know how to work with it. And we have 2 very famous names here as authors, among others, Christian Kashin from IBM Zurich Research Lab. He's a cryptographer, and Chris Ferris, who is head of the Hyperledger Fabric Technical Council, and a lot of other people as well. So those 2 papers, please read them before the end of the week, and you'll really get a lot of very foundational information about blockchain and everything that goes into it. I also want to mention something that comes up every time I talk about blockchain, and that is the fact that there are 2 blockchains at least. One is for cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, tokens, ICOs, and one is for business assets. The 2 are quite different, although there are overlapping architectures, but what we will be talking about today and the rest of this week and last week is business assets on blockchain. They're quite different from tokens. So where we are now then is that we've described a shared, replicated, permissioned ledger with consensus, provenance, immutability, and finality. And that is what we are working with here for blockchain for business. Consensus means that everybody has to agree for new data to be put on the ledger, or at least the majority have to agree. You cannot just willy-nilly put new data on the ledger. It has provenance, meaning just like in the art world, you can point to prove if a painter or a data set is true or not, or is the original data set. Immutability, you cannot change the data once it's out on the ledger. And finality, it's the final truth that is out on the ledger. And no central third-party mediator, such as a financial institution or clearinghouse, is involved. It is just the members of this blockchain itself that are managing the chain and the ledger. So this is where we are, and now the question is, where do we go from now? And here is what we're going to do. We're going to build an end-to-end Hyperledger application in the next half hour. And at the end of this half hour, you should be able to do this yourself and really have some very good skills in building applications that are beyond just the business aspects of it. So the first start then here is to begin by looking at the pre-regs for Ubuntu and the Mac. You notice that Windows is not included here. It's only Ubuntu and the Mac so far. And I have the URL for these preregs at the bottom of the page. Spend a lot of time and go through these URLs and these preregs very carefully. Because if you don't get them right, if you don't have the right preregs, you will not succeed. We have operating systems, Docker, Node, NPM, Git, Python, and the code editor. And I made a note here about NVM, use Node. That is something that you need to use to be able to get the right version of Node, which in my case is Node v8.11.2, but it can be higher than that as long as it is not version 9. Again, take a lot of time to go through these preregs and make certain you have the right versions. Otherwise, you will fail, which I have. So that's why I'm speaking from my own experience. Now we begin by installing the Composer CLI tools and the Fabric. And you remember the CLI is the Composer runtime, and the Fabric, of course, we know what that is. We start with these 4 commands. And again, the URL for these commands are at the bottom of the page. We will begin by installing the CLI tools, doing a global install, npm install -g Composer CLI, and we're going to show you how to use that in just a few minutes. And then we will install -g Composer REST server. The Composer REST server is very, very, very important here because we have a network that we're going to bring up, which is the Hyperledger network, but we will not be able to communicate with it either going into the network or going out to the network without having a REST server. And the REST server allows us to communicate with systems of record, among other things. Because when you create a blockchain application, you very seldom just have blockchain. You usually have systems of record that already are in place and that you need to communicate with. For that, you need the REST server. So this is a very important install. Then we will install a utility for generating application assets, install -g generator Hyperledger Composer, and we'll show you more about that in a second. And then you will install npm install -g yo for Yeoman. If you have not used Yeoman, you will be very happy to use it here because this is a great tool, and it is very similar to your Ruby on Rails, where you can generate application scaffolding with it, and you can be very productive using Yeoman. So this is a very, very good news that we're going to use that. And therefore now we have installed Hyperledger Composer CLI tools, and we are ready to move on to the next step, which is Hyperledger Fabric. We will now install the Fabric itself, and that does not take very much time. As I mentioned before, you can easily run it on your laptop. And of course, later in the next week, we'll show you how you can expand it and run it in the cloud as well. But we're going to make a make-dir here, Fabric dev servers, then use do a curl command to install fabric dev servers.tar.gz. And then we can also use zip if we want to do that rather than the tar.gz. And then once we have downloaded that, which will be 6-7 minutes, something like that on a good line, we will then do a Fabric cd to Fabric dev servers and download the Fabric itself. So this is kind of the longest session here, kind of where we install these 2 bigger code items, but nothing special. And again, they run very easily on your laptop. So you can run it, you can actually run many of these installs on your laptop if you want to. And we have the URL for these commands down at the bottom of the page. Now we're going to start up a new runtime. And we will start by doing a cd to Fabric dev servers and simply say start Fabric. And then we will do a create peer admin card, and I'll talk more about the peer admin card later. So this is a very easy way to stop and start the Fabric. And if you want to close it down, you can do so and bring it up again. But now then we are ready at the point where we have a new runtime. And the question is, where do we go from here? And where we go from here is that we're now going to write our application. And we will use Yeoman to create a skeleton business application. This is, again, just like Ruby on Rails. If you've done Ruby on Rails, you know exactly what we're going to do now. The command will require a business network name, a description, an author name, also the email address, license selection, and namespace. The only thing that's important really is a namespace and network name here. And keep now in mind that this is the business network archive that we are dumbing up, as it were, with Yeoman. So we do say Yo Hyperledger Composer :business network. And then we enter the parameters 1, 2, 3, 4. This will take a couple of minutes at the most. And then we will have the network running, or sitting rather, on our laptop. And we have the URL to where these commands are here at the bottom. We have a CTO file, also called a model file, a JavaScript file, and an ACL file. And this, therefore, is the cornerstone of the business network. And we have dummied that up, if you will. We have not created this thing now using the composer. We are taking pre-existing model files, pre-existing JavaScript file, pre-existing ACL file, just to get something up and running quickly. And here we have the model file, and you can see what it looks like. You recognize this from last week. It has a namespace, an asset, and with a string with a trading symbol, a description, a main exchange, and a quantity. And the trading symbol could be like IBM or Google or whatever symbol we want to trade on the stock market. The main exchange is, for instance, the New York Stock Exchange, and the quantity is the number of shares we have, like 10 million shares of IBM stock. I wish I had that. And then we have the trader. We identified by the trade ID. We have the string trade ID and first and last name. And then we have the transaction itself. You remember from last week, we had to have a transaction here to do something. And this is a trade, commodity, and the trader. And what we're doing here is we're changing owner. We are taking our shares and we're giving it to somebody else. You are taking all your shares and giving them to me, and I'm the new owner, which is the way it should be, I think. And then we have the URL to this file here down here as well. So this is the dummy file that comes that we will install, and it runs fine, but it may not be the file that we want to use later. And we'll show you then how you can change this to create your own file. And then we will replace the JavaScript file as well. We see an async function, trade commodity, with the trade coming in, and we simply change the owner to the new owner. And then we update the get asset registry as well. So this is, again, is a very simple application, but it does something, and it shows us how we go about to create an application. And there is therefore a very good didactic application. The ACL file is also very important. In the beginning, when we create blockchain applications, we always give everybody access to everything. But later, when we have more users, we will have to tighten things up so that everybody does not have access to everything, especially when we start using channels. And now you may ask something when you see this file. How come you can have a manually entered ACL file for a business network that can include maybe thousands of members? How can you possibly do that? And the answer is that for blockchain and for Hyperledger, you very seldom have thousands of members in a business network. There's something to be aware of, because members here is the same as peers. And the network will actually not have thousands of peers. It will have maybe a few dozen peers at the most. Maybe a little bit more than that, but not very much more, not even hundreds of peers. So that's why you actually can do it this way, do it manually. And many people believe that these networks will become gigantic, again, with thousands of peers, thousands of users, which is not the case. That is not the way this blockchain really actually works, at least not for business applications. Now we're ready to create our BNA file. From the tutorial network directory, we run the following command: composer archive create -t -dir -n. And now we have created the tutorial network at 001.bna file. And now we are ready to rumble, as it were. So hopefully you realize now what we have done. We've taken the source files, we have created the BNA file, and the BNA file is the same as a WAR file, or very similar. If you know Java, you know WAR files, and the BNA file is the same as a WAR file, an archive, in other words, containing the information we talked about before. This looks a little bit messy, but it's actually not as dangerous as it looks. We are going to begin by doing a Composer Network install using a card, peer admin card, HLF v1, Hyperledger Fabric v1, and an archive file, and that is the BNA file. So we are installing our BNA file on the network. Then we will do a network start, network name, tutorial network version 001, network admin, the name is admin, network admin enroll secret, admin PW, and then the card name. And that is what we're doing for the business card. Then we will import a network administrator identity as a usable business network card. And that's a very simple command, composer card import, file network admin card. And then we will do a network ping to see that we got everything right. So it looks a little bit messy, but once you've done it a few times, you realize that this is actually, there is a logic behind this thing. I put in a chart here on the business network cards. It's something you should be aware of, and you will learn it very quickly when you begin to create your applications. The card is the way again to access the network. And keep in mind that this is a network where everybody does not have free access, but you have to be invited to this network, and we have to know who is who in the business network. And that's what the network card is all about. So it fulfills a very important role and something we have to be aware of when we begin to work with the business blockchain. Now we're ready for the fun stuff. We're now going to install the REST server and Angular front end and run our application. And thank you, Ruby on Rails, because this is really brings back fond memories from previous years, for me at least. So we will then do an install of the Composer REST server on port 3000. Composer REST server, here we have it. And look at that, woohoo! We have a GUI. We have a Hyperledger Composer REST server where we can do get commands, post commands against commodity. And then we have commodity with an ID. We have system, trade, trader. And you can see we have all the objects in our application mapped to the Hyperledger Composer REST server. And we can then actually run this and enter commands using enter get commands and post commands and head commands, etc. here in this GUI, in this user interface, and have something up and running with the user interface and the back end servers very quickly. Not more than, say, 20 minutes to get from where we were earlier and to get to here. And this is the development methodology to use the Composer REST server. And now keep in mind now that this is, first of all, a way to reach into this system here, and also a way to reach out to systems of record, which play a very important role in blockchain applications, because systems of records will not go away just because we come with blockchain. We will have to coexist with them. So here we have on port 3000 the Hyperledger Composer REST server, and we are doing fine. Everything is fine, and we are ready to take the next step. And now we want to generate the Angular server, and that is, or the Angular application, I'm sorry. That is now where we will get the real application, the real GUI. And we say, yo, Hyperledger Composer and Angular. And the Angular generator will then generate the scaffolding for the project and install all dependencies. So this is a very, very nice tool. Then to run the application, we navigate to our Angular project directory and run npm start. And then we go to http://localhost 4200. And what do we see? Look at that. We see an Angular app on the left, on 4200, communicating via localhost 3000 to the Hyperledger Composer REST server and talking to the Hyperledger application. So this is the architecture for the total application, with the Angular application, the REST server, and the application. And we can now talk out to the outside world, to any other system we were interested in, and people can talk in from localhost 4200 down to our Hyperledger application. And let's show you how to do that. Here we have the GUI, the Angular application with assets, and I have entered here a trading symbol, ABC, a description, a main exchange, quantity, and owner. And I can create many more. And I can delete and update as well. I can then go to the trader tab, and I can enter traders, and I can create participants there, and the same as before. And now we go here to transactions, and I can invoke a transaction, and I can set a new owner, which is the way it should be if you remember the source code. And I can then add the transaction ID and the timestamp. There's only one issue with this thing. It doesn't work because there's a bug in the code. This is the way it should work and will work when the code is fixed. You can see we have a product, an issuer, a new owner, a transaction ID and timestamp. Fortunately for us, a really great programmer called Yaswant Madaka has fixed this problem. And on medium.com, on CoinMonks, he has actually written a very good set of information steps about how to fix this bug on our own. And so thanks to him for doing that. He also has a full Medium article, building a blockchain application using Hyperledger Fabric with Angular front end, very similar to the talk I've been going through here. He says it's part 2, it's actually part 1, but it's great, and you should take a look at that as well. If you are not familiar with Medium, you really should read that every week, if not every day. It has become a prime source of information about Hyperledger, about blockchain, and about anything computer-oriented. It's really, really great. And then at the bottom here, we have another from medium.free codecamp, another article about another application written in the same style as I have told you here, or showed you here, that you also can go through and take a look at. Because this is a very good pattern that we can all use in creating applications quickly with Hyperledger. And here is now the architecture at a high level. But over on the right, we have the Hyperledger Fabric, V1. Composer REST server, you remember that. Angular Web UI, you remember that. And then the administrator or the user who is then interfacing with the Angular Web UI, which in turn is talking to the Composer REST server and in turn talking to Hyperledger Fabric. And this is the iconic Fabric use case that we should be aware of. If you have come this far, what I urge you to do is to take a look at my good friend Rahil Zubair's Decentralized Energy Composer. This is an open source sample application, if you will, that you can use to verify your knowledge and see if you cannot implement this thing also in about half an hour, something like that. It follows the same pattern, and it's one of the IBM code patterns that are really useful. And here, since it is open source on GitHub, you can actually communicate with Rahil. You can fork his code, and you can then see if you cannot add things to it. And he will be overjoyed if you do that to see that people are using his open source repositories. And here is his GUI front end, as you see. And it's a little bit more elaborate than the one we had for our own sample application. And here you can see again, he has bank accounts, and you can trade with the bank accounts and do all sorts of neat things with his application. Now we are going to talk about some of the code patterns that IBM has. Now, if you come this far and you say that this looks neat, then there are a dozen or more IBM code patterns out on GitHub for you to use, following this very same pattern that we showed, this very same architecture. So there is no reason why you cannot go through what we went through today in the next, later today or certainly this week, and then begin to, begin to work with these other patterns as well. And you have an entire library of patterns, therefore, that you can quickly go through, learn how to create blockchain applications, and go on to bigger and better things. We have created fair trade supply network, create and deploy a blockchain network using Hyperledger Fabric SDK, implement asset securitization on blockchain ledgers, leverage blockchain monitoring, and there's some overlap here among some of these. Deploy Hyperledger Fabric on IBM Cloud, track donations with blockchain. These are really, all of them, very, very useful things to know and to learn how to implement. Because again, if you have this library of blockchain applications, you can quickly create applications for whatever you're called for to work with. It's really, really great. And that pretty much is, and then here we have the created decentralized energy network with Hyperledger Composer. So that pretty much is what I wanted to cover today. You now have all you need to create an application on your own, following here, the steps I went through. You get a copy of these charts very rapidly here, very quickly. And then again, there is nothing to prevent you from beginning to create real applications on your own using what we went through today and the code patterns that IBM has up on GitHub. And give us your feedback and have a really good time, because this is great stuff to work with and not as hard as you may expect, perhaps. And Maya, I think that's what I have so far.
Awesome, sounds great. Does anyone have any questions? I think we had one question. Val was asking if Docker is required, but I think Val, we're going to go back into the slides to see the resources or requirements page. But Lennart, if you want to answer.
Right, I don't see the screen here now, but I will answer. Docker is required, yes. And that is listed, that was listed among the pre-regs.
Great. And then, Lennart, the second question is, what is the pricing model to use Hyperledger?
I'm sorry, what is the?
What is the pricing model to use Hyperledger?
That's very simple. The price is $0, 0 cents, zero everything. Doesn't cost you a cent and never will.
Are there any more questions, or are we good to go? If you have any more questions, so someone asked, is it going to be free just for now or forever?
It will be free for as long as you live and as I live, as long as our children and grandchildren live, and as long as their grandchildren live, forever. It's open source and totally free.
Awesome. Are there any more questions? You good to go? Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. If you have any more questions, feel free to put them in the comment section on the right-hand side. And then Lennart will go ahead and answer them after this session. But you will have access to the slides. I'll be sending that to everyone who registered. And right after we've closed this session, you'll be able to access the recording as well. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to see you at next Tuesday's session as well. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.